Hey everybody, this is Billy with eMaint, and in today's workshop we're going to go over managing our spare parts and inventory within the eMaint X4 system. So here are some of the topics that we're going to cover in today's session. So the first thing that we're going to go over in today's inventory workshop will be the inventory table review. So what we're going to do here is we're going to view the inventory records that currently exist. We're going to go over creating inventory records, as well as how you would modify the information within the part itself. And then once we've completed that, we're going to move on to making adjustments to our on-hand inventory, may it be a positive or a negative adjustment. Once we go over adjustments, we're going to head over to the related tables and learn a little bit more information about some of the additional information we can relate to parts, such as all the history of the part itself, the item suppliers you can attach to parts, as well as any related assets or pieces of equipment you want to attach to a part. Once we've completed that, we'll move on over to purchasing. So a few of the things in the purchasing we'll go over is the reordering parts list. We're also going to go over how to create a purchase order after we go through the reordering parts list. And then we're also going to show from that purchase order we created how we can actually receive those parts and bring them into our inventory. And then to wrap up this session, what we're going to end up doing is going over parts kitting. So what we're going to do with parts kitting is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a kit part. And then what we will do is for our kit, which is going to be a kit of multiple items, we're going to show how we can attach multiple different inventory items to a single kit item, so that way you can attach it to the kit. And then we're going to go over how we can actually add or remove kits from our inventory. So that's the basics of what we're going over in today's topic. We're going to go over and head right into X4 and show those features off. So when you log into your eMaint X4 system, what you're going to want to do is head over to the Inventory tab here on the left to open up all the part data that you have in your system. Once you open it up, it'll probably look a little bit different than what you're seeing on this screen. I have this screen a little bit customized to see some data that I find most essential for my parts. And that data would include information like the item number, the description of the part itself, what my current on-hand inventory is, what the unit cost is for my part, is it a stock part, yes or no, as well as a good image. So we have a general idea when we're looking at the part if some of the few bits of information in the list aren't clear enough. Having an image can help us visualize to understand what that part is. So we can go ahead and we can modify what fields of data we want to see on this list view, and we can easily do that by heading over to the top right-hand corner and picking this little book-looking icon, which this allows us to manage the table columns we see on inventory. So if we go up there, we might have some additional data we want to see, like, for example, maybe the manufacturer part number. So, not even the manufacturer part number, but we can go with the manufacturer. So we can go ahead and we can add it. I'll put it right before the picture because I like having it at the end. And then we can apply the change. And then we can pull some additional information such as the manufacturer. So you can see on some of my parts I have some of that manufacturing information, some of them I do not. And then if I ever need to take that off, I can head back over to managing my table columns, and then I can just hit the minus sign next to that field to remove it from my list view. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and create a brand new part into our eMaint system. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to hit the plus button here in the top right-hand corner, and this is what's going to allow us to create a brand new part. Once we click that button, you're going to get a screen with all the default fields that are on your inventory. So my fields are just a teeny bit different than what you might have in a basic account. You might not see the picture field or the Acme part number field, but this just shows that you can add additional fields as you need to, because there might be a situation where the data you currently have isn't enough, and you may need to either add additional fields to your form or subtract fields. So the first thing we need to enter in the system is an item number. Now the item number has a maximum character length of 15 characters, and it cannot have any spaces, it cannot have any special characters like, let's say, a $ or a pound sign, and it cannot have any lowercase letters. So to go ahead to create our part, I'm just going to create the part number 1005. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write a description of what type of part I'm putting into my system. So for example, I might have a lug nut. So I'm just going to go ahead and type in lug nut, and then you could go a little bit more detailed in your description if you'd like to fill in that information. The next important field is the stock item field. So what this field actually means is this a part that you would keep in stock that you're going to still use for your day-to-day operations? Maybe for repairing an asset, or maybe you just need to charge it out for usage in some other way. So if you're still actively using this part in the system, you'd want to keep it a stock item. A scenario where you wouldn't keep this as a stock item would be, for example, you're no longer going to use these lug nuts ever again, but you have some history associated to it. Because every time you do anything on a part, such as adding it into the system, charging out a purchase order to it, or getting a purchase order and bringing the inventory, charging out onto a work order to take it out, making a manual adjustment, adding or removing it from a kit, all these different little things cause inventory transactions to occur to keep ourselves an audit trail. So you might want to keep that history in the systems. That would be a reason why you keep it in the system, but taking it off as a stock item to no longer use. And then we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the unit cost. So this is just the cost per unit that you would purchase. So I'm just going to say as an example, each lug nut I purchase is going to be 75 cents. So I'm just going to type in 0.5. And then as we move along, you can set up what's known as our reordering point and our reordering quantity. So what this allows us to do is whenever your on-hand inventory is either at this reorder point or below, the item will automatically move to the parts reorder list as long as we have a supplier attached to that part. So in this example, I want to always have at least 10 lug nuts on hand. If I don't have 10 or I have a little bit less, we can allow this to go into our reorder list. So the next field below it would be when the item moves to the reorder list, how many of these parts do you want to automatically be ordered? So for example, every time that this part hits 10 or below, I want to reorder 40 of these lug nuts. So that would be the scenario where you would put 40 into here, and that would be the default value. Now we do have the option once we're there to increase that number or decrease it if you need to. It just gives us a general guideline of knowing how many you would typically reorder whenever you would get below a certain point. Some additional fields you might fill in would be like the unit of measurement, which location it is. I've seen many different clients where they have shelves which they would label such as like A5, A6, and then they have shelves below them, so they call them like A5-1, A5-2. So that way they have a general idea of where this part is located in the system. Now there is another feature set that we won't be going over today, and that's multi-location inventory. So if you do store parts at many different locations, what we can do in your system, as long as you contact your customer success manager, is they can go ahead and they can install multi-inventory locations in your account. And then by creating a single item, you could have it attached to multiple locations, each of them having their own on-hand amounts, and each one of them can have their own reordering points, because you might have a low point of how many have to be at each location. So that is a possibility. So if that is something you're interested in, please feel free to contact your customer success manager, and they'd be glad to assist you with it. Now the rest of the fields on here are optional. You will probably want to fill in an on-hand amount over here, but we're not going to do that until after we create the part. The only other information that I would see very vital that you'd want to fill in would be some of your manufacturing and supplier information. The reason this is because whenever you're creating an item, if you need to have it being used for the reordering, what you're going to want to do is you need to have a supplier attached to it, or you're not going to be able to find it on your reorder list. So we're not going to fill that data in yet, but what we're going to do is once we create this part and we get on to the next section for related tables, I'm going to show you how you can create an item supplier and then have these fields automatically populate based on what our current default supplier is. So let's just go ahead and save the part information we have now. And you can see that our record was created successfully. So the next thing we want to do is, now that we've learned how to go ahead and create the item, if you ever need to edit any information, you can go ahead and hit the edit button right on the screen and then edit any information you have. The only two fields you cannot edit on this screen are the on-hand amount, because to make any on-hand amounts adjustments, we have to use an action item called adjustment, which we'll go over in just a second. And we also cannot change the item number from this screen. Since this is the key field that could be attached on many different tables, such as you can put an item on a charge for a work order, you can make a purchase order for the item. If you made a change here and you edited it, this value would not update on those other tables. So to make sure that we keep data integrity across of all the tables, we added another way that you can modify the item number, and that is through the Actions Key Change option. So this lets you change the item number, and the system will then detect all records that had the previous number and switch it to the new number that you would now associate to it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over how we can make a parts adjustment. So this is going to be our way of either increasing or decreasing what our on-hand inventory is. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to head over here to Actions, and we're going to go over to Adjustments. So once we're in Adjustments, what we're going to do is first pick the adjustment type that you want to do. So you could say if it's a physical count, a cycle count, you're transferring parts in or out, is it an overage? So you might state that you have too many already on hand, and then you're just going to be removing some. So this is just some little identification keys of understanding the type of adjustment you're making in the system. And then a few other bits of information are filled in, such as the transaction date, the location, which if you're not using those multi-location inventory methods I was mentioning earlier, then that would be an example where you don't have to worry about it because your location will always be main. But if you do have multi-location inventory, you'll be able to see all the different locations that exist, and then you can either choose that location, the location you'd like to increase or decrease our inventory. So the next field you'll see is the current on hand. We're not going to change that value. That's just a little reference information for us to know what we currently have on hand. And then the field below it is what we use to either adjust in either a positive or a negative quantity. So what we're going to do is we're going to increment this by 5. So we are going to add 5 of these lug nuts to our inventory. And once we've completed that, we're going to hit proceed. So what you're going to see is that our transaction is saved, and now our on hand changed to 5. So if you want to see where you would find this information to see that we made this adjustment at 5, what we're going to do is down here, we have a related table that's called 12-month part history. So on your account, you might not have the tables down here. You might have a little tab on the top right-hand corner to get to related tables. But if you don't have it down there, you could go out there to related tables, and you should see the same information as I see below. So what we can do is we can first filter by the part history, and what we can do to load that up is hit the click here to load data button. So by default, we usually have a 12-month part history where it checks today's date and makes it the ending date, and then it goes a whole year backwards. So on this part, what you're going to see is the inventory location, which is main, and this location doesn't change based on us filling in the location here. This is what's known as the main location on an account that only uses a single location. So this way we don't have information that's inconsistent. It just keeps it all at a same location. So you'll see that we have 2 different transaction types that exist. One of them is called beg ball, and another one is called physical account. The beg ball just stands for beginning balance. So when we created this part today, you'll see that we created the part with 0 of these on hand with a cost of 75 cents a piece. And then after that, we made a physical count adjustment. So what we did is we added 5 more in inventory, and then you can see the date that this was completed. So this way it helps you keep an audit trail to make sure that the parts that you're either charging in or out have a valid track of how the information is coming in and out of inventory. So the next thing we can do is we can add one of those item suppliers we mentioned earlier to this part. So I don't recommend doing it directly from the part, but what I recommend doing is creating an item supplier in this related table. And the biggest benefit of doing it from this related table is the fact that you're going to be able to have multiple item suppliers you can attach to a part. So you might have one of them that's considered your default as they are the primary supplier that you would purchase this part off of. But if you might have a scenario where one potentially ships faster even though it costs a little bit more money, you might have a scenario where you need that part ASAP. So you might be willing to spend a little bit more money, and then you could choose the supplier that you want to purchase from based on this list here. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the Add New Record button to create our new supplier. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick the supplier we want to attach. And to do that, what we do is we could head over to the Supplier ID field, and then we're going to hit the magnifying glass here on the right. Once we click that button, what we're going to do is get a list of all of our contacts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for the category of supplier since I want to attach a supplier directly to this part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to Mark Brown from Home Depot, and I'm going to add him as a supplier for my lug nut. And then I'm going to apply my change. And what you'll see is the supplier ID as well as the company fills in with some information that was on our contact record. And then if we have any other additional information that we need to fill in, so you might have a supplier part number, a manufacturing part number, a manufacturer. And if you have any other information you need to fill out, you can do that. But once you're ready and want to complete this, you just go ahead and you can save the new record. And then if we head back, you'll be able to see that we now have an item supplier here. One thing to note, though, is that if you definitely want to use this in the parts reorder list, the only problem that we currently have now is we don't have a default supplier set up for this part, so the system wouldn't know what supplier to use in our reordering point. So what we need to do is we need to set up this supplier as the default one to make sure that this information gets populated on the part, so that way we can see this part in our reorder list. So to do that, what we'll do is we'll hit the Go To button to the left of the supplier we created, and we're going to hit the Edit button on our items by supplier. And you're going to see this field in the bottom called Default. This is the field that lets us know which supplier at the current time is the default one for this part. So if we had multiple suppliers attached to this part, what would end up happening is whichever supplier was the default at that time, their default value would turn from true to false, as we should only have one default supplier at any time. And some other information you'll actually see is now that we turn that default to true, you'll see that on the part itself that our manufacturer, manufacturer part number, default supplier, and supplier part number have now automatically populated. So that's just one of the different things that happen with the item supplier. So I'm going to head back real quick and I'm going to open up another part that has a little bit more information just to help give you some additional knowledge of data you can see on a part. So you can see on this account, for example, I got an image of the part itself. I have 2 item suppliers, which I can switch back and forth on who is currently the default supplier for it. And then what we can see in the next table that we have not gone over yet is that we have 11 different assets related to this part. So if you ever have a scenario where you charge a part out to an asset, what this related table helps you know is any assets that you've ever charged a part out to, you'd be able to see it here. And what you'll see here is a quantity field that doesn't state how many you currently have on hand, but what it tells you is how many parts you normally take out of inventory each time you do a work order on that asset. So it just gives you a general idea if you ever have a work order for that asset and you see that this is a part that's frequently used, you would know how many you would need to take out of inventory each time to complete a job. So that was the purpose of this related assets table. And then one other thing I wanted to do is I really wanted to open up the parts history on this part, just because as you saw before, we looked at some information with the beginning balance as well as the physical count, but I wanted to go over a few different adjustment types that we didn't get the opportunity to on the first one, as we didn't have much history on it yet. So a few other things that you could do on the part is you can issue out a part to a work order. So whenever you are on a work order, there is a related table on there called work order charges, where you can make a part charge directly to that work order. So what you would do is after the part charge is saved in the system, you're going to get a transaction of issue that tells you that on this work order right here, 148, and based on this asset ID 1008 being on the work order, this is the part that was charged out of inventory. And you'll also get a date timestamp of when that occurred. Another type that we have here is, and these two are related to each other, is both the purchase and the receipt. So anytime you create a purchase order and you add this part as a line item to that purchase order, what will happen is a purchase transaction will get created. And then you'll also see the purchase order number here on the right. So when you click purchase, the item doesn't come directly into inventory. This is just stating that this part is currently on order and that this is a part that we need to purchase. The receipt value after it, that's what states specifically that the part has now been received into inventory and that that line item on that purchase order should be closed out. It doesn't always close out because you might have a scenario where you receive on a situation 10 parts and you receive 5 at one point, 5 at another. You're going to end up having 2 receipts of 5. So it's just any time you have a receipt that brings parts in inventory, you can see how much of that inventory you brought in on that date and at that time. The one other that we didn't show yet is the return. So what this is whenever you have a work order and you make a charge on it, such as this work order 627, we can see here on March 1st of 2016, on work order 627, we issued one part to the work order 627. Well, this could have been a mistake, or maybe the next day you realize you don't need that part and you can bring it back into inventory. So the return is whenever you go to a work order charge, and you return an amount that you issue back into your inventory. So you can see that it's referencing the work order number and that we brought that one part back into inventory. So that's a general review of the parts history. So it just gives you really a better idea of how you can track and audit your information with timestamps on everything. So that goes over the first two sections, which is the inventory table review, as well as our related tables. So the next thing we're going to go over is actually using the parts reorder list. So if you've never used the parts reorder list before, you can access that information up here in the main menu. And what you're going to do is when you go to the main menu is you're going to head over to Purchasing Center. So Purchasing Center has 4 different options that we can use. One of them is our parts reorder list, which will show us by supplier all the parts that we need to reorder. The second option is our PO receipts, which help us see receipts that are for our purchase orders. The third one, which is the section we're also going to use, is the Update Pending POs. So whenever you go into the parts reorder list, if you push an item and do not specify a purchase order number, the parts that are being reordered don't automatically go to a purchase order, but they actually go to the pending PO screen. So you have the opportunity that if you're going to be pushing multiple bits of data, you could actually push more than what's in your parts reorder list onto the same purchase order. And then our last section is our purchase order center. And the purpose of that specific section is to see by supplier all the different purchase orders they have, so you can see how much spending you've done on different suppliers. So that's what that section is used for. There is some additional sections that help us gain some information on the reordering itself. So let's say, for example, we have this part. Right now, the current on hand is 8 and our reorder point is 1. But you might have a scenario where whenever this item goes on the parts reorder list, you may want to be notified right away whenever a part goes to or below that reorder. So if you want to set it up that you would receive an email anytime a part needs to be reordered, what you can do is you can click your name here in the top left-hand corner where it says your name and the My Shortcuts icon. Or if you don't see it, the My Shortcuts icon should show up in the top right-hand corner. What this should do is should open up a tile menu for us to access our account settings. So we're going to click that. And once we're in our account settings, what we're going to do is we're going to head over to our inventory control settings. So right here, you can see some different information about the part itself. So first thing you'll see is what inventory method we're using. So by default, you're going to use a standard inventory method, which just means that whatever is the last cost of the part, that's what the cost is for all parts. But there are a few additional inventory methods that are available in eMaint. One of them is FIFO, or known as first in, first out. We do have LIFO, which is last in, first out. And then we also have MAP, which is moving average price. So all those are different options you can have. By default, you'll have standard. But if you are going to be using a different inventory method, so let's say, for example, you want to use FIFO, it's highly recommended that we put that into the system before you use parts, just to make sure that all your information is consistent. Because if you've used parts for a while and then you want to change inventory method, it's not 100% guaranteed that all the information is going to be correct in that scenario. So a few other options you can see in here is you can see if you're currently using multi-location inventory or not. And then you do have some options in here, such as allowing direct part charges to assets. So if you're on an asset and you have this option turned on, like you can see here, you'll get an option in the drop-down menu that says Actions to charge a part directly to an asset. Another option here is allowing zero quantity inventory adjustments. So I don't really recommend using this setting. This is just specific for people who aren't tracking what their actual on-hand inventory is and they just need to charge out parts. So they're not too worried about auditing or anything like that. They just need to be able to charge parts out. This just allows you to charge a part out even if your on-hand quantity is 0 or if the amount that you're taking out brings you to a negative number. The next option here is auto allocation of parts. So if you're going to, on a preventive maintenance schedule, add specific parts that are going to be used for a job, what auto allocation does is when a preventive maintenance schedule generates into a work order based on its either calendar or meter-based frequency, that it's going to move that information to the parts requirements related table. So you can see that those parts get allocated directly to the work order. The next one is create stock allocation warning. So it just gives you some warning information for your stock and for your stock parts. And then there's also another option for auto create stock requisitions for allocated parts. So if you have parts that based on allocation occurring on a work order, and that brings it below the reorder point when you take what your current on hand is plus what your current on order is minus your allocation. If that number is at or below our reorder point, then it can automatically create a stock requisition. So we won't be going over requisitions in today's session, but it's a way of using an approval process to allow parts to be ordered for purchasing. And then the last few options we have is including allocation quantities in the reorder calculation. So if you want these features to be up here, you most likely want to turn this setting on. And then the last feature we have here is allowing duplicate related assets and parts. So if you're on a part, for example, you could actually allocate the same asset multiple times, and you could have the different quantity for a few times or even the same. But if you don't want any duplication, you only want to ever see the asset on the part once in that related table, you could just turn this feature off. And then down here below is where we have all our inventory adjustment document types. So when we went to actions adjustments, here's all the options you had. So if you ever decide you need an additional option that doesn't already exist in eMaint, you can add it here from the inventory control settings screen. The next thing we can look at is our purchasing and requisition options. And this is what's going to give us more information about purchasing and requisitioning. We're not going to go over this section today just because a lot of this information is on requisitioning. So this will be covered in another workshop done down the road in a few months. So to use the parts reorder list, once again, we're going to head to our main menu, and then we are going to open up our parts reorder list. When we go into our parts reorder list, what we're going to get is a list of all the different suppliers that currently have parts on order. So you can see, for example, the part that we created is right now on the reorder list, because at the time when we created it and we added inventory, we only have 5 on hand. So what ended up happening is because our lug nut only has 5 on hand with the required 10 or more, what ends up happening is this item gets pushed to the reorder point. And you can see here, based on some of the information we filled in, we have 40 of them being reordered at the cost of 75 cents like we created it. It's going to put a default required date, which the default required date that gets populated is a week from the date that it's created by default. You can change it to something else if you'd like. And then this is just what some of the base information looks like. So you can see some supplier data, such as the part number itself. You can see the address information, contact information, phone number. All that information shows up here. So I'm not going to push this one over. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick another one which has multiple parts on it, and that's going to be my supplier for Z1 Motorsports. So you'll see when I pick this part, we have 3 different parts associated to it. One of them here is quarts of 15W30 engine oil. We also have a Nissan OEM filter as well as a copper crush washer. So what we're going to do is we want to push this into pending purchase orders, so that way we can create this into a full-fledged PO. To do that, what we just do is we hit the Process Checked Items button here on the bottom right. And since all of these are currently checked, they all get pushed into the pending PO screen. And then we can close this up, and then we can head back into main menus and Purchasing Center, and we can pick our next option, which is Update or Pending POs. Once the screen loads up, what you're going to see here is all the pending purchase orders by their suppliers. So what we can see below is that because we picked the Z1 Motorsports supplier, we can see all 3 of those parts that we pushed. So you can see some information such as the cost per unit, the total amount that we ordered. We can see the EXT cost, and then some other information based on this part. So what we want to do is we want to push this into a full-fledged PO. What we can do is we can either we can hit this little button right here that says PO to assign it a purchase order number, or if we want to review this information, what we can do is we can hit the magnifying glass. So what we did is we hit the magnifying glass, and what we can see is some additional information on the part, such as the dates, the EXT cost, and then we also have the ability to go into here and we can actually edit the amount we're ordering. So if I want to order 15 of these instead of 10, this is your opportunity to change the quantity that you're ordering. So once you're ready, what you can do is you can hit assign PO number. But if you want to remove one of these from the pending PO screen because you don't actually need it, you can hit the X button here to remove it from your pending POs and not reorder it. But we're going to keep everything here. So we're just going to assign the purchase order number. And it's going to bring up this screen that's asking, here's all the parts that you currently accepted. Would you please check on the boxes that you want to reorder? So this is your last chance to push items into the reorder list, or to choose ones that don't get pushed into a purchase order. So if you don't need a copper crush washer right now, you could uncheck this so you don't order it, but we're just going to order them all. And what we can do is we can either let the automatically generated PO numbers pick our PO number for us, or we can go ahead and we can type in a brand new number. So in our scenario, we're going to create purchase order number 500,001. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assign that PO number. And you'll see here that purchase order 500,001 was now created in eMaint. So to actually see that purchase order that we've created, what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the table here that says purchase orders. And we're going to go ahead and on this list view, we're going to type in the name of that purchase order, which is the 500,001. You'll see here that we've created a purchase order. And when we click on the number, you're going to see some information based on the purchase order itself, like the purchase order number, the supplier and supplier name that came over from the part, what location it is. And as I mentioned before, since we're a single location inventory, it's always going to be Maine. What the status is, if you have a work order number associated to it, who it's being shipped to. And this ship to field right now is only showing my name and not address information. The way this information gets pulled is based on the user you're currently logged into. So if we go back to our account settings like we did earlier, what we're going to see is a screen that has our contact information. So since I don't have any address, city, state, zip, or country information, that's why that data didn't get pushed over to the purchase order. So if you want that information to automatically populate, you definitely want to make sure you go into your contact information and you fill this out and make sure that your ship to credentials get automatically populated. So what you're going to see also is below the purchase order itself is we have a related table here called detail lines. And what detail lines allows us to do is see all the different parts that are currently being ordered. So you can see how many we've ordered, and then we can also see the quantity that we've currently received. So at the moment, we haven't received any of these parts yet, but if we would like to receive them into our inventory, what we do is we go to the Actions button here, and we hit Receive. So what you're going to do is you're going to get a screen that pops up that shows us some information about the parts that we've ordered, how many we have ordered, and how many we've currently received. So if you're in a scenario where you know that you've received all the parts in inventory, you can hit this autofill button here in the bottom left-hand corner, and it's going to fill in on all these purchase orders the full number that you ordered, such as the 10 quarts of oil, the 3 filters, and the 3 washers. So what I'm going to do is, let's just say, for example, we got all our filters and all our washers, but we only got 5 quarts of oil. So I'm going to change that to 5, and I'm going to close out the lines that I don't need, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to process this information. So what this did is it just saved our information. If we close it up and refresh our related table, you'll see that our received quantities have now been maxed out on both the filter and the washer, but we've only received half the quantity of the quarts of oil. So if we need to go ahead and receive the remaining parts of our purchase order, we just head back over to the Actions Receive option. And then in the top, what you can do is you can see that the 2 in the middle and the bottom have been closed out, and you can see that they're checked to know that we've already fully received them. But if we need to receive the remaining portion of our purchase order, we can hit the autofill button again. And the number here doesn't populate with 10, but it populates with the information of how much we have remaining. So we can go ahead, we can close it out, and then we can process this information. So this will bring it over, and you'll see that we've now updated with the quantity of received of 10. And if we need to see a receipt of all the different times we've received parts in the inventory, we can head over here to Actions and then View Receipts. And then you can see here, here's our receipts. So you can see the filter and the washer only needed a single receipt to get them all into inventory. But you can see for the quarts of oil, we had to do 2 different transactions. So that's why we had 2 receipts, each receiving 5 in inventory. If you do need to recreate another purchase order, such as you just want to make an identical clone of this one, you can go ahead here and you can do a copy add with detail lines. So it'll actually bring over all these detail lines as well. The only things that won't be filled in are information like the received quantity. Since we don't technically have that receipt quantity done yet, you're repurchasing to receive more. Or you could just copy and add the base part of the purchase order and then you could just add your detail lines manually. Or if you don't need the base details that are on here, you can hit the add button and start one from scratch. So you can go ahead and do that process, and that will help you go and create purchase orders in eMaint. So the last feature we're going to show off today is our parts kitting. So what parts kitting essentially is, really the best way that I can explain it, is it's making a kit of items that you have that can perform a specific task. So think of a first aid kit, for example, how we have our bandages, how we have we have our bandages, we have wraps, we have possibly like alcohol for bruises, things of that nature. We would have them all in a first aid kit. And each one of those items in a first aid kit would be its own part. So the first aid kit itself would be what's known as a kit item, which is the container for all the parts within that kit. So in today's example, we're not going to create a first aid kit, but what we're going to do is we're going to create a kit for doing oil changes. So you saw with our purchasing today is we reordered some quarts of oil, we've ordered some filters as well as a brass copper washer. So what we're going to do is, based on that, we're going to go ahead and we are going to create a kit for doing oil changes to make it simpler. So what we're going to do is, first is we're going to create a brand new part in the system. And you can see the 3 items we have here. These are the 3 that we're going to use to create our kit. So we're going to go ahead and we'll add a new record like we did before. And then once we're at that screen, what we're going to do is type in our item number. So I'm just going to put in 1,000 for the kit. And then I'm going to type in kit for oil change. Now the rest of the information I'm not going to fill in. I'll put stock item as check, but the rest of it I don't need to worry about too much because you can reorder kits. That is an option. But for filling in like unit cost, unit measurement, I'm not going to worry about that, since once we have all the items attached to our kit and we actually bring them into inventory, data like our unit cost and our on hand will automatically adjust. So we'll just go ahead and we'll save those new records. And now we have our kit item. So one other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to add a picture to my kit. So if you need to ever add a picture to your image, or sorry, a picture to your inventory, what you can do is just hit the 3-dot button next to an X3 document storage field. Then you can go ahead and you can upload an image, and then you can attach it directly to your part. So just because this is a kit of an oil change kit, I want to get a picture of what an oil change kit might look like. So to add items to a kit, what we're going to do is we're going to use this related table below called kit items. And this is what stores the reference to know how many of each part do we put into a single kit. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a brand new record. And what we're going to do is use the reference number field here to reference the part we want to add to our kit. So on our example, we're going to pick the first item here, which is going to be the quarts of oil. And we're going to check the box here and apply it. And then you're going to state how many quarts of oil do you normally have for a single kit. So in this example, we're going to use 5 quarts of oil per oil change that we do. And then we're going to select the main location. And then you can go ahead and you can hit Save New Record if you're done. But if you need to add additional items, I highly recommend highlighting over the down arrow and picking Add New Record to attach a second item to our kit. So we'll do that. We'll hit the magnifying glass once again. And now we're going to pick our oil filter. And normally on an oil change, we only use a single filter. So we'll go ahead and pick a quantity of 1, pick the location in main, and then we're going to add a new record one more time. So here you're going to see we'll pick our copper crush washer, quantity of 1, inventory location main, and then we're just going to save our record. And then we're going to go back. So now you're going to be able to see here on the bottom, now we have all our kit information, so you can see the dates we've added it, how many you normally would have, and the location they came from. So our unit cost hasn't been adjusted yet, but it will once we add a single kit into our on-hand amount. So let's just say, for example, we know we have 2 oil changes that we have to do today, and we want to make it more convenient for our mechanics to have all our parts into a single box. That'll make it easier to complete their job. So what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 kits today. So we're going to do that by going to Actions and then Create Kit to create a kit in our system. Now let's just say, for example, we want to create 10 kits because we need to do that. If we type in that we're picking from the store locations in main and that we need 10 of them and we proceed, you're actually going to get an error message that pops up as a validation warning. So what this states is that there's currently not enough parts available to create the 10 kits that we desired. The current inventory will allow for the creation of 3 kits. So would you like to create these kits? So what it's saying is because currently we only have 3 oil filters, 3 copper washers, and we only have 15 quarts of oil, we only have enough parts to create 3 kits total. So the system isn't going to let you create more kits than what you have on-hand inventory, but you can decrease this number or keep it the same when you create your kit. So in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and hit proceed for adding 2 of these kits. And what you're going to see is our on-hand now adjusts to 2 on-hand, and our unit cost updates with the total cost of all the parts in the kit. So this is the summed up cost of the 5 quarts of oil, the oil filter, as well as the ring. And then if you ever need to, so let's say, for example, we have our kit. Let's say we need to add one of these kits back to the shelf. So we want to bring these 5 quarts of oil, the oil filter, as well as our copper washer to our inventory once again. If you ever need to break down a kit and take some inventory out and bring it back to the part, what we can do is we can go to Actions and Break Kit, and we can break our kits. In this scenario, we're only going to break a single kit, and then it reduces our on-hand inventory by 1. Then you'll also be able to see in the part history, you'll be able to see how we created additional on-hands by creating kits and breaking kits. So those will be 2 more inventory transactions. And those transactions won't just show up on the kit item that we've done it on. It will also show up on the parts themselves that were part of that kit. So if we head over to this oil that we have right here, you'll see here near the bottom that we created a kit that took 10 of these out of inventory because we created 2 kits. And then we broke the kit, we brought 5 of these parts back in inventory since we broke a kit, and then we had 5 in that one kit. So that's the basic overview of our inventory demonstration in today's workshop. Just a few additional information. Next month, we will have an upcoming eMaint web workshop on requisitioning in eMaint X4. This is the first time we've ever done a workshop on requisitioning, so I'm very excited to be able to present it. And this will be occurring on October 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. A few others that we'll be doing in the future are preventive maintenance tasks and schedules in X4, as well as an introduction to eMaint for our new users. Now, when it comes to our best practices webinars, what we have coming up is on October 19th, we'll have maintenance planning and scheduling by our very own Greg Perry. And then on November 9th, from Joel Levitt from Reliability Web, he's going to go over where your CMMS fits within your reliability journey. And then on December 7th, we will have another topic presented by Greg Perry, but at the current time, this is to be determined. Now, for our upcoming boot camps that we have 2 of them in August, as well as 2 of them in November. In October 11th to 13th, we have our Systems Administration Bootcamp. And then on October 25th to 27th, we have our Work Management and PM Workshop. Now, the really cool one that I'm really excited for is this next one coming up, which is the Report Creation and Design and Dashboard Design. This is our first ever 2-day reporting session. And this is by very popular demand that people are continuously wanting to know more and more about reports, creating their KPIs and dashboards, and getting more involved. This boot camp is going to really dive deep into this subject and help everyone who attends get a very deep understanding of creating reports and many different type of ideas that you might have never realized until just now how to do. So you'll get a lot of good information by coming to that. And not only that, it's the days right before our Accelerate Local event here in Bonita. And then we also have from November 15th to 17th, we have another boot camp for our inventory and purchasing. So speaking about Accelerate Local, we still have a few of them coming up. So next week on Tuesday, on October 4th, we'll be coming to Chicago to bring our Accelerate Local event there. And then 8 days later, we're bringing the team over to Dublin to teach a session there. And then we also at our Bonita Springs location, like I mentioned, the day right after the 2-day reporting, we also have our Bonita Springs Accelerate Local that's happening on November 3rd. Thank you everybody for watching. Have a great evening.